Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, Forbes Sporting News, covers the NBA, and he joins me now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. We had a fun night last night, and Mitch, we're getting towards Christmas, which means we're starting to sort some things out here in the NBA.
Well, what I liked about last night was Embiid played because we had been disappointed. I had been disappointed that he couldn't play a couple of games, and I love the fact when someone asked him about his back, he said, if these were the finals, I'd be able to play. I mean, that's just an outstanding quote from Joel Embiid, talking about if this is these were the finals. I mean, a guy who's played a handful of games basically in his career. So I love his sense of humor, but I really love the way they played last night. And you're right, they were kind of lucky. Minnesota's got some chemistry issues. That's what you hear, internal stuff going on. I guess they're still trying to sort out who's going to be the guy there. Last night it was Jimmy Butler, but you have some young players in Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. Apparently they don't want to be overshadowed, and there's always the minutes question with them. But, I mean, how about that overtime session? The Sixers hardly scored a basket, yet, they lived at the free throw line, got out of there with a quality win. Like you said, Minnesota's been playing pretty well, so that was a good job by the Sixers.
Yeah, I thought other than winning in Houston, that might be their best, most impressive win of the year because they didn't play very well, and they're doing it without Covington, who's a very important piece. And, Simmons didn't really score a whole heck of a lot last night. I mean, so they had to do it in other ways, turning the ball over and hanging around. I thought that was kind of a grown-up type of win last night.
Well, you're right. You're right. And, for me, it's always about Embiid and Simmons. I'm still waiting to see Markelle Fultz. Has anybody seen him in Philadelphia? Do we know where he is, what he's doing? I mean, it's just incredible to me he's out this long. And I want to really, what everybody wants to see in Philadelphia and outside is those three, the big three together.
Yeah.
And, because there's some parts of these games where, okay, you have Saric on the court and these other guys, McConnell who's nice, but you really want to see Fultz, who's a big-time talent, and how's he going to translate to the NBA, off the ball, with Simmons, with the ball, and Embiid. That could be your big three for the future.
And, Mitch, that's the piece right now that this particular team's lacking. We're not saying Fultz is carrying them to an NBA championship this year, but that's really the piece that this team is missing, that guy, and they hope that it's him anyway, the guy that can take the ball to the basket. That's where you're getting to Christmas. You're finding things out about teams. They don't have that guy that can take the ball from a wing and score.
That's absolutely why they got him. Now they paid a lot for him, right? They moved up to get him and traded away a big asset to get him. But that's what they're thinking, that Fultz will be that type of player. And so we just hope that he's, what are they saying about his return? I mean, we're gone through here almost 30 games or, whatever it is. That's a lot of time that he's missed. So I'm sure it'll take him time to get acclimated and everything. And then we'll see how it works out with their big three. But it's exciting nonetheless.
I'll tell you, though, for someone like me who's been very supportive and on board with them, and really thought they'd be a playoff team. I thought last night was pretty important because right around Christmas you start to see things. Last night they were on the outside looking in terms of the playoffs. I know it's a little early to start, but the East now looks like there's a good 6 teams that got some pretty good standing.
Well, we know who's at the top of the East. The interesting thing to me is that you've had some teams like Charlotte, who people thought were going to be a playoff team, and they've had a lot of struggles. And Detroit, the bottom's fallen out of Detroit. What, they've lost 6 or 7 in a row?
7 in a row.
Which is incredible. And Stan Van Gundy, you talk about what's important at Christmas time. You think Stan Van Gundy wants to be tinkering with his starting lineup now? I mean, that's just absurd what's happened to them. They got off to such a great start. I mean, they beat Golden State on the road. They almost beat them at home last week. So they've been, to me, now a disappointment because they haven't been able to sustain. Milwaukee's been impressive the way they've gone about things recently. Toronto is always doing things quietly. And, of course, we know at the top, Kyrie Irving's coming back against Denver tonight, so Boston will be fine. I saw Washington last night without John Wall. They're 5-6, and they were awful against the Nets. And I know they've been on the road for a long time. It was a weird trip because they played on the West Coast, Mike, and then they went from L.A. to Brooklyn. Now, they had a couple days off, but there's, to me, no excuse for losing a closeout game on the road. When you have designs, as Washington does, to be a top team in the East, maybe go to the conference finals. I'm sorry, I know Brooklyn's playing hard and they're playing very well for Kenny Atkinson, but the limited talent they have versus what Washington came in with last night. I was out there, and it was a bad job by the Wizards.
Yeah, and I wasn't big on Washington last year, even in the playoff season, but they didn't add anything this all. I mean, what did they do this offseason?
No, you're right. And see, that's the reason why when Milwaukee got Eric Bledsoe, and I wrote this for Forbes, I went out a little bit of a limb, as I want to do. When Milwaukee got Bledsoe, I said, you know what, they're a top 14 now in the East because they're going to play with a lot more pace. They've got somebody who can really push the ball. They've improved tremendously their point guard from Malcolm Brogdon, who was the Rookie of the Year last year, but he was a second-round pick for a reason, to a guy like Eric Bledsoe. I figured they'll be in the top 4, and the team I picked to fall out was Washington for the reasons you talk about. And last night, Bradley Beal, I'm sorry, when Bradley Beal and Otto Porter are on the court against Brooklyn, they should carry the day when they don't have John Wall. Yeah. And they didn't do it.
Beal, 33 shots last night. 11 for 33 he was last
awful.
night.
He was dreadful, and defensively he was lost. It was an embarrassing performance for the Wizards.
I got Boston, Cleveland, Toronto. They're in. They're not moving. Milwaukee we like. Indiana's been a surprise, but I'll tell you, Mitch, I like Oladipo.
Yeah, well, you know what? Here's the funny thing. People are asking me what's the deal with Oladipo because his first 4 years he couldn't shoot. Well, his shooting is still – it's mind-boggling. He's now 44% from three-point land. He's the featured player. You know, sometimes guys need to be, they need to be the major guy, the major domo, and he is in Indiana. They've played they were one of the clutch teams in the league, Mike. When you look at down the stretch of games when there's a 5-point differential, 5 minutes or less, they're like they've won 7 out of their last 8. Of course, tonight, Paul George's big return to Indianapolis, I wrote about it for Forbes. This might be a situation where it's his first time back with the Thunder. It might be his last time back with the Thunder. They might need to trade him the way the Thunder's going. But Indiana has really played well. They eliminated Paul George, Rodney Stuckey, Monta Ellis, who are all big-time locker room complainers. And that's a big thing now, is that they got everybody on the same page. You don't have those divisive elements in the locker room anymore. And Oladipo is the most improved player in the league. I don't even think it's close with him and Tobias Harris.
Yeah, we'll get to the George piece you wrote coming up. Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio is with us here. I like what Indiana brings. I kind of like, not their games, but just the story. Like Oladipo was the second pick. He bounced around Orlando, Oklahoma. Now he's in Indiana. Chauncey Billups was the pick, and he was lost for a couple of years. When he finally settled into Detroit, he became Billups. I think this is what's happening with this kid.
Well, we'll see. I mean, you got to remember, Chauncey was the Finals MVP.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying he's going to be. I'm just saying the story more so than the player.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes a guy, he was in a bad situation in Orlando. That was not a well-run organization and a lot of bad parts, young parts, and he needed to get out. And so, of course, he went to Oklahoma City. Now, in Oklahoma City, the situation is when you're playing with Russell Westbrook, you're going to be just watching at points. To seeing what Russell Westbrook does, you're not going to get the ball in your hands. But the thing about Oladipo, and I talked to people about this last night over at the Nets games because everybody's talking about him. Talked to people with the Wizards, talked to people with the Nets. He's always a big-time athlete coming out of Indiana. Yeah, he was undersized, but the biggest problem was he was a good driver, but he really was not a good shooter. And what he's done with the shooting has been astounding. His three-point percentage, his overall percentage, he's raised the scoring average, 8 or 9 points. And they feature him. And when he's featured and he's able to get up and down, and they really play with a lot of pace, they shoot the three ball. They don't shoot a ton, but they shoot a high percentage, so he's surrounded by other guys who can knock him down. It's a good story in Indiana because we all thought, I don't know how you felt, but I thought this team was not going to make the playoffs.
I agree.
You trade a guy like Paul George, and it looked like they got fleeced in the deal. They didn't get even a second-round pick. They got Domantas Sabonis and Oladipo. But I figured, all right, Oladipo's going to be the same player. He's been a lot better than anybody thought. And they're en route right now. They could make the playoffs. Now, I'll just say this. They have not played a game further west than Oklahoma City. So they've got some big West Coast trips coming up. You know how that is. All of a sudden, that 5-game cushion they have now could dissipate. But we'll see what happens. But so far, so good. And it's a nice story for Nate McMillan. Because, last year was a real disappointing year. The way things ended, the way Paul George forced his way out of town, it's nice for that organization. The only problem is, I also pointed this out in my Forbes piece, they're not drawing flies to that arena. That's the best arena going in the NBA, or at least one of the top 2 or 3. I've been there many times. Bankers Life Fieldhouse, the old Fieldhouse type of feel to it, the atmosphere, it's great, but nobody's turning out. They're averaging less than 15,000 people a game. Mike, the only other team that's averaging less than that isn't at 15,000 is Atlanta, and of course they're rebuilding. You got nobody to come out and see.
They don't come to Atlanta when they're good.
Right.
Indiana's in the 5. Washington's at spot at 6. We think when Wall comes back that's a playoff team too. So really in the East, you got 2 open spots, 7 and 8 possibly, right? Is that you feeling the same, or is Indiana a wild card for you?
They're still a bit of a wild card because of the schedule. Now look, the thing about you have these, certain teams. Take Joel Embiid off Philly. Take LeBron James off Cleveland. Take John Wall off of Washington. What happens? You got basically a sub-500 team now in Washington. You've gone from John Wall to Tim Frazier. And when Bradley Beal and Otto Porter don't step up their games, you get results like last night. I still think Washington's going to make it, obviously, as a 5. So they're going to be a bunch of teams scrambling for that. Miami, they're around 500. I don't think Charlotte is a very good team at all. We're going to have to see long-term what happens with Steve Clifford, their coach. Detroit, are they going to make a move? I think, they're always coming up with trade rumors. You'll see Stan Van Gundy go off on the media because he says we're creating stuff. But you all know that you and I know that Stan Van Gundy, if there's a big-time player or any kind of player he feels he can help his team, they'll make the move. He's not shy about that. The Knicks are okay. Their problem is at the end of December, Mike, they play 16 out of 20 on the road.
Yeah.
Now, a good thing for a young team is to play a lot of home games early. You get your bearings, you get your sea legs, you get your confidence. The problem is, and the Knicks know this too, the coaches, they need to prove that they can play together and win games on the road. That's going to be hard for them to do. So, although they've gotten off to a decent start here, the fame could be fleeting over at the world's most famous arena.
Yeah, I see the 2 spots, 7 and 8, Philly, Detroit, New York at 14 and 13, but I don't even know if they're a factor. Miami's 13 and 13. So it seems that there's only a handful of teams for those 2 spots. So if you're Philly, you probably feel pretty good about getting one of those last 2 spots because they got out of the gate with a pretty tough schedule. They've gone out west already once, handled it pretty well. So if I'm Philly right now at 14 and 13 and in, I know we're not right around Christmas. You start looking. If I'm Philly, I feel pretty good about being a playoff team.
As long as Joel Embiid can answer the bell.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, when he couldn't play, what was it, against the Pelicans because of a back thing?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, whoa, he's got a back thing after he had to sit out. So you don't know. I mean, it's all about him. Now, Ben Simmons is tremendous. Everybody thinks he's going to be Rookie of the Year, even though he's a redshirt guy. I mean, they've got 2 studs. We know that. And those guys, if they stay on the court for the majority of the games, and I'm talking about the big majority, not 55, 60%, Mike. They got to play 80, 90% of their games coming up. They can get a playoff spot in the East.
Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio. Let's look at the West. Houston's kind of 21 and 4. They've led the way virtually from start to finish here. The Warriors have been a little banged up, but they're right there. But the Spurs getting Kawhi back last night, this makes that top 3 pretty interesting now.
Well, the thing that really stands about the Rockets, I don't know if you guys noticed this because you're fixated on the Sixers, and rightfully so. When Houston went into Portland, and then Houston, I think, played the Pelicans, they were behind going into both fourth quarters. I think they were down 14 in Portland. They were down maybe 12 against the Pelicans. And they came back and put together 2 unbelievable fourth quarters in Portland, which is a very tough place to play. I know the Blazers aren't winning a lot at home these days. They made 15 of 18 shots in the fourth quarter on the road. Put up a 40-point fourth quarter, outscored them by 21, Mike. And after the game, Terry Stotts, the Blazers coach, was talking about, look, we stopped their three-point shooting. We stopped their passing. We decided, all right, we're going to play them one-on-one, and they got destroyed one-on-one. When they go with Harden and Chris Paul down the stretch of a game, and Alvin Gentry talked about this too after the same thing happened basically against the Pelicans, when they play those 2 guys down the stretch, they move the ball, they share the ball. They're basically the exact opposite of Oklahoma City, and they really can score. So, they get to the line. We know what Harden can do. That team right now, like Terry Stotts said also, I don't know if you saw this, but he said right now, he's talking about December, 11, 12, 13th. Right now, Houston's the best team in the NBA, and I can't disagree with him.
Minnesota's that 4 spot. We saw them last night. That's a pretty good – I don't know what happened. A lot of people talk about Thibodeau running them guys too hard. And I don't know, a lot of people thought he'd come in there and he was the right coach for that team. They're winning, but they've struggled recently. And last night, I don't know how they let that game slip away last night.
Well, they're learning how to win with their guys. A lot of these players, they brought in Butler, they brought in Taj Gibson to deal with, Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. And like I said, I had heard through the grapevine, there are chemistry issues. young players want to be featured. Sometimes, when you got Jimmy Butler who's featured, it could be a problem. They're a good team. They're going to make the playoffs. They are talented, but they got to get their act together. And, you see it around the league, Mike, with the Bostons of the world and the Spurs. Good chemistry, it means everything, right? I mean, Boston had chemistry from when they hit the ground running with 11 new players. And the Spurs always have great chemistry. Now, last night, okay, Kawhi came back. You might have a setback here and there because you're incorporating him back in with LaMarcus Aldridge. But Houston's had tremendous chemistry. Minnesota's one of those teams, just like Oklahoma City, where there are very rough spots where they're trying to figure out who gets the ball when and who's going to take the big shots and all that stuff. And that's why what Boston did, with a 16-game winning streak right out of the gate was so impressive.
Phenomenal.
A team like Minnesota is going to have some problems and some rough spots. And, they talked about it last night, the minutes. Tom Thibodeau, plays his guys extended minutes. It's not popular these days. It goes against all the science. It goes all against the analytics. You had Jeff Van Gundy commented that the minutes police were going to be out in full force against Tom. But that's the way Tom does it. And I'll tell you what, Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, they should be playing top minutes. They're young guys.
Yeah.
I mean, don't worry about them. It's the older guys who
Mitch,
you worry about, and that's where you scale back their minutes.
I remember a time, growing up, I'm 40, that Sixer team that had Barkley, Mahorn, Jaminski, Dawkins, and Hawkins, you couldn't even name another guy. They played 38 minutes a night. Ron Anderson played about 25 minutes, and that's all you got off the bench. I mean, there was a time when there was two guys that came off the bench. These teams that go 8, 9 deep, and guys play, it's ridiculous.
Well, it's a whole the science of the sport has changed everything. Now it's all about lengthening guys' careers. You didn't hear about that in the past. You never heard about basically teams, basically saying or intimating, well, we want to make sure that these guys are around for the next 5 or 6 years. Everything was about this year or maybe next year, but nobody looked that forward down the line. And now you've got analytics and you've got the science of the whole sport, which, players should rest. They shouldn't play this many minutes, and this type of, back-to-back is no good. And you've got the league buying into it, too, by changing their whole schedule up and starting the season early to cut back on the 4 and 5s. It helps the players. It helps also the product, which is fine. But, you've been around. I've been around. I wish guys would play more minutes sometimes, but I also see what the teams are doing because it's a big-time money investment. You want to make sure if you're Golden State that Steph Curry has a long, real long career for you and Kevin Durant, and you get the most out of them, the maximum for the longest amount of time.
Mitch Lawrence wrote a piece at Forbes about Paul George. Many people thought this Oklahoma City team was going to be right in the top 4 with all those big, heavy hitters. What has happened there, and what might they have to do to fix this thing?
Well, they might have to move Paul George. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, look, they're in a situation where it hasn't clicked. It's been bad chemistry. It hasn't been a good fit with Westbrook, with Carmelo. I think, to me, and, I said this on Sirius Radio the other day, NBA Radio on the show, I think they made one move too many, and that was Carmelo. And I'm not blaming Carmelo. I think if Sam Presti had to do it over again, sure, go get Paul George, but just have Paul George and Russell Westbrook, keep Enes Kanter, keep Doug McDermott, and go there. It seems like they've just got too many isolation-type players who need to just have the ball, and you got to clear out and let them do their thing. And you know what? They're not sharing the ball enough, and Billy Donovan's under a lot of pressure. It seems like he hasn't devised the right offense. They've lost a lot of close games. They've, defensively, they've played better than we thought at points, but offensively, this has been a train wreck. They're among the bottom teams offensively and efficiency and all that stuff. So this is the type of thing where if Paul George is going to walk to the Lakers, Mike, over this summer, you've got to get something for him. The problem is, what is anybody going to give you in terms of a rental? That's the thing. If he's really going to L.A., and he's still here, he's going to L.A., although he always talks about he wants to win, and he gave Oklahoma City a kind of a great, good housekeeping seal of approval when he got there, but this is not what he signed up for. He did not sign up for it to be, 2 games under 500 after 30 games.
No, not at all. If you're L.A. right now with the young team they have, and they've been competitive. I mean, they're not brutally bad like they've been the last couple of years. 10-16, not awful. Just do they get into the George conversation this year, or do they wait till next year?
They'll make a run for him when he's a free agent this summer. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Now everybody talks about they've got 2 max contract slots already. What I've heard is that, no, they've got one, and they still have to do tinkering with the roster, whether it's getting rid of Brook Lopez or getting rid of some other players. They don't have to. And, of course, the second would be LeBron James, of all people, who, by the way, I'm not buying this whole thing that he wants to play in Philadelphia or anywhere else in the East. I think it's a nice story. It's great for, internet hits. But to me, Mike, if he's leaving Cleveland, he's going to go to L.A. And so if you have LeBron James and we've gone over this, LeBron James and Paul George with Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram, yeah, you're going to have a hell of a team. Why? Because you're bringing in LeBron James, who, by the way, isn't slowing down. But Paul George, you start there. Paul George probably, I would think, if they're not going to do much this year, it doesn't look like they're going to do much. Hopefully they'll make the playoffs. Let's say they don't move him. I still think he's going to walk and become a Laker. He's told teammates over the years when he was in Indiana for 7 years, that's the team he wanted to play for. So I don't think that's changed.
Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, Forbes, Sporting News, covered the NBA long time. As we know, Christmas will be the day. We got all the stars out, including Embiid in New York against the Zinger. That should be a great one to kick off NBA on Christmas Day. Philly and New York are relevant again.
How about that? I think it's Embiid's Garden debut, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he's played
I don't recall him playing there last year, and we know Ben Simmons didn't play there last year either, so those two will make their debut in New York.
So we're looking forward to that. The Knicks have been, the Knicks through thick and thin, and there's been a lot of thin lately. They're always on Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's a huge day in New York. Knicks traditionally on Christmas Day, and it's great to have that rivalry kicking up again. And it's great. I'll tell you what, it's great to have the rivalry not just with New York and Philly, but how about Philly Boston? That's a.
I was just going to say you got Boston.
That's one of the great rivalries in sports, especially when it came to I grew up watching games in the '60s, so I remember I still remember Wilton Russell. Not like I'm saying I was sitting there breaking the game down, Mike, but I was cognizant of it. I was growing up then, so yeah, this is a great time in the NBA. The league loves the fact that it looks like the Phillies coming on the way back, the Knicks are on the way back, and if Lonzo Ball can start making some shots, and let's say they do get some big-time free agents, here come the Lakers.
Yeah, it should be good. In the East, you got Boston, New York, and Philly all starting to be relevant, and we'll see what happens. Brooklyn, with that trade they made, Okafor, we'll see if he can get his head on straight. They got D'Angelo out there, so they should be an interesting team anyway. We don't know if they're going to start winning anytime soon, but the Atlantic Division has got some really good storylines. Mitch Lawrence to break it all down with us here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Mike.